Hi guys, welcome back for part 2 of our podcast episode for our interview with Ryan Kennedy. I'm Laura Hayes. This is my counterpart.
And I'm Cheryl Livingston.
And we just want to welcome you back. We did have a couple quick finds for you. So I, this week, in addition to cutting my hair, I found a hairstylist, which was really important during COVID. But I also found this really great resource. I may have mentioned it before, but I hadn't realized how many integrative resources and links and supports are on this website, but it's called makebeliefscomics.com, and it's MAKEBELIEFS comics, COMIX.com. And it's neat. The resource is kind of in the title. You can make your own comic book strips, which is cool in just a motivation sense. Like, I wish I had the ability to make my own books and comic strips when I was younger. But for us as educators, it's actually an educational website. So it has lesson plans built in, it has story starters, it has writing templates, it has everything that you could kind of want to tailor to what you're already doing in the classroom, especially to support written expression. Additionally, it has specific lesson plans for those of you who work with kiddos that have autism and are needing some social support, social scripts. It already has some built-in lesson plans for that, as well as just the ability to write some concrete, short stories to support what you're doing in the classroom.
And you don't have to know how to draw?
You don't. There's already built-in pictures and bubbles, and so it does require some supportive writing, so you might have to do some supportive writing with it, but super motivating, and did I mention totally free?
And just think how fun that would be, just to be that creative, and I can see, the kids being totally engrossed in all that. So that'd be cool.
Right. And you can download the comics so that you have a written piece of expression to take with you and go back to. Very, very neat.
Cool.
Yeah. How about you, Cheryl? Any fun finds this week?
Well, I realized that I maybe didn't know about something that everybody else might know about. So this may be old news, but I want to just remind you that there is a site called pbslearningmedia.org that has tons and tons of resources. And like I said, we've already known about PBS Kids, and I've played all the games on the website, but this is more the teaching part of it. So they've got it divided up into pre-K all the way up to high school, and then within that, they have different subject matters. So you can click on the age of the kiddos that you're working with, and then the subject. So if you want math activities, if you want science, but it's taking everything from the little bitty kids with the Eleanor Wonders Why to, the National Geographic kind of things where we're talking about, real animals, and making it so that there's printable materials and there's lesson plans and stuff that you could, easily share with all kinds of your different resources that you want to put together. And I just was amazed at how much PBS has done to help our students, especially during this time of virtual learning. If anything, anybody at all could be, sitting down with the student and enjoying that time with them on that site.
Yeah, and
free
is the key word, right? And you had mentioned to me, it was the first I had heard about the educator side of things. But how did you stumble across it, Cheryl?
Well, a coworker, Kim Girth, who is in early childhood in Rockwood, she is on a committee to develop some new materials for them. So there's going to be more to come that we can share that with you later. But she's like, oh yeah. And I'm like, what? So of course I was like, does everybody know about this? So yeah, it may just be me, guys. I don't know. Or Laura admitted to that she didn't know. But I was like, oh, this is cool. This is definitely cool. So check it out.
For sure. And speaking of checking it out, feel free to check out the rest of our interview with Ryan Kennedy. There's some great gems in here, so stay tuned. And we will also be sharing another innovative activity towards the end. So thanks for listening. So how about those kiddos that we have complex kiddos in the district, right? And you've worked with many of them. We've had our challenges, and when teams are struggling, like it feels like they're really struggling and they just want to unlock the kiddos for the benefit of both parties, right? They want to see them succeed, and they want to really open up their world. So tell the listeners more about what it looks like if a team is struggling, and what we can look for and what we can do assessment wise, diagnostically to kind of delve in a little bit and see.
Yeah, I mean, no two situations are the same, even when it comes to, almost especially when it comes to, those kinds of, those tougher situations, those stumpers, because it's like, well, if they were the same, then we would already know, just do the thing that we did last time. But yeah, I mean, it almost depends on, kind of what the challenge is. And really, I guess that's sort of where we start with, kind of that taking a step back and asking ourselves, what is the challenge? What is the breakdown? Is it simply a lack of motivation? Is it a lack of appropriate reinforcement? Maybe we know what the big reinforcer is, but are we, matching the, kind of the expectations, or, what the requirements are to earn that reward appropriately, so that it's a functionally kind of worth the student's time and effort to get that? Are we expecting too much? So when we push too far too soon, we can kind of have this breakdown where, we're not able to make contact with that reinforcement. That's something you'll see, a lot of times, maybe if we're talking about more of like a behavior plan situation, where we have, just kind of use this sort of garden variety example. Maybe you've got this behavior chart and you've got this expectation, and it doesn't matter how motivating that reward is for that student sometimes. If it's, mom and dad are going to take, him to Six Flags on the weekend if he meets his behavior goal. Well, where have we set that goal? Is it attainable? If it's something that, isn't realistic, even if the reinforcer is great, it oftentimes doesn't matter. So you have that breakdown. So what we would want to do is kind of come back through and look and see, okay, well, do we have reinforcement there for the times that, that we really need it?
Do you feel like you're doing a lot of functional behavioral assessments? Are you guys constantly doing that? Are you?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and.
Yes. So, I mean, that's kind of the, the starting point, I suppose. If we're, if we're feeling stuck and we haven't done that, then obviously that's kind of, the next first step, to do that FBA or functional behavior assessment, really trying to look at, making sure we understand what is, if we're talking about challenging behaviors, what's the function of it? What alternative responses do we need to teach? What preventative strategies can we put in play? What ways can we build in additional reinforcement throughout the day for appropriate behaviors when things are looking good? We have a structured interview that we do with, with teachers and staff and parents as part of an FBA process. And, it's got, who knows how many questions, 30 questions maybe. It's one of these long form interviews. And there's two questions in there that I always kind of try to really drill into. And they ask, if we're talking about a challenging behavior, under what circumstances would this behavior always occur? And then the flip side is, under what circumstances would this behavior never occur? So those two questions, and I'll always try to kind of, elaborate with folks when I'm delivering the interview, and I'll just kind of say, okay, if I have 10 minutes, to come in and observe, and I need to see the behavior, either what time are you telling me to come, or, I'm not saying you should do this, but what's the thing that you could do that for sure would make this, challenging behavior happen? Because that, really often tells us, what are the antecedent factors? What are the setting events? What are the triggers for this behavior? And just knowing that, really clearly, if 100% of the time that something is going to happen under these circumstances, that can tell us an awful lot about, what we can do to prevent that, or, again, get us kind of thinking about the function of the behavior, so we can start thinking about, what we need to teach. And then the other side, obviously, is if that behavior never happens, at certain situations, well, what is it about those situations? So those are kind of the, just before we get in and we start actually observing and taking data, those are the big questions that I like to kind of get staff to focus on, because that tells us about, is this something that's related to, demand level being too high, or breaks being too short, or access to, preferred activities or avoidance of, particular people, or, types of demands, things like that. So those are kind of the first questions that I like to really get into before we get in and start observing and taking data on the behavior itself.
Now, have you ever had anybody say like that you are like, if you come in and they won't do the behavior? Yeah, because I always feel like when I come in, they're like, they're having the best day. Like, they're like, we don't know why they're having the best session. And I'm like, I don't know what it is. When I come in, it's just, it won't, whatever they're struggling with doesn't occur.
And so there's observer effects. That's a documented phenomenon. We know about that. So the challenge for me is, okay, well, how do I observe without making it feel like I'm observing? And so I've tried to get all kinds of clever and the way that I'm, trying to be as unobtrusive as possible. But of course, I've had folks it's always a big joke that, we'll set a specific time and, it's always, you got to see music class because there's, when they do instruments or whatever, and then I'll go and well, this is the first time, she's had a perfect day here.
Or if you video, like if you were like, just get a video, they're like, oh no, best time ever. Like they knew they were on video magically.
I've heard people joke about wanting a cardboard cutout of me in the room so that they can, and what I always tell people too is, hey, if nothing else, it gives you a good day, and it kind of goes back a little bit to that question about, have we set the expectations too high? Can we get are we capable of a good day? Can we design what is the best possible day for that student look like? If we strip back, whatever our other expectations are about all the things that we think that we have to be doing all the time. If we don't do calendar, the world is going to stop spinning. But it's not. We can do other things than do calendar time. And so if that's the challenging time for that student, maybe we can still figure what it is about calendar time and work up to being able to tolerate it and be more successful at it. But, just to kind of get to thinking about, what are we really capable of right now? What's our kind of best case, kind of baseline, even if we were to strip out some of those demands and other tasks, because that if nothing else, also if you're dealing with really intense behaviors, that might be your first intervention a lot of times. If you're talking about behaviors where, things really are explosive or dangerous, well, our first plan is not to, to really jump right in and confront those issues. It's to, get safety and have some stability, and then, work on kind of, understanding and tackling those, those problems in a systematic way that's going to prevent, those explosive situations. If we can.
And meet them where they're at, right? I mean, we've had kiddos, especially because now we follow kids from kindergarten through the end of high school, graduation, BSP, all that, and I think it's so important because you can see a kid, and when the kid feels safe and secure in their environment, and they have a level of rapport and know what they're going to get, what they want, and get their needs met, they're more not just apt to learn, but you see this like relaxation. And we've seen kids go from not having that to having it, and then how their learning level changes and how quickly they can find new information. And we've seen the opposite, right? We've seen kids that are so successful, and we see them go to a new school, and it's like, oh my gosh, like what happened? They look like a totally different kid. But sometimes it's just, small things that we have to piece out of, well, what really changed? Is it the building? Is it that they really missed this one person that was really important to them there? So that's super helpful as far as looking at assessment. And if somebody had ABA services, and they felt like they were struggling, they could talk to their associate, correct?
Oh yeah. I mean, to me, that is like, that's our job, on a daily basis is problem solving and troubleshooting. When things are going really smoothly, I find myself just kind of, being a little bit of a cheerleader and monitoring, but those are the easy situations that I feel like teams don't need a lot of hand holding for me to figure out, oftentimes, where to go next, or if we do, it's a real simple, kind of check in and make sure that we're continually kind of pushing skills forward. But, and, an awful lot of what we do is just supporting folks. So, for me, I want to know, as soon as people are feeling, like they're not sure if what they're doing is effective, or, if the data is showing that, we're stuck on, a particular skill that we've been trying to teach. And obviously, the behavior challenges too, if those are things that are really, coming up, and we haven't already determined what our plan is to monitor, or to, not to monitor, to address those issues. Yeah, that's really what we want to be, doing on, a regular basis, is, supporting teams that need help.
So we've talked a lot, we've kind of touched on a lot of different AAC systems, but how have you felt like, in the here and now? I mean, I know we've worked the last 5 years in really building AAC programming into all aspects. So you've been such an asset to adding it to the ABA programming. How have you like grown and incorporating that? Because you did say like working and collaborating has been growth for you, in the last 16 years. But what do you think that looks like now? And give me some examples on how you're incorporating AAC into the ABA programming.
I think, right now, I think what we find ourselves doing more and more of is, especially since we have more students that are utilizing, devices, and, whether it's an iPad or, it's almost always an iPad, I guess, but whether, some touchscreen device with voice output, making sure that we're kind of moving past, the types of situations that we're comfortable using PECs in, if that makes sense. That's sort of a weird sentence, but I think we really like PECs. We really get it, and it's really good for, establishing that communication exchange, that kind of interaction, and specifically from that sort of functional language, angle, those requests, meeting those wants and needs. I think the area that we kind of get to the point, though, where we've got lots of requests established, and then that's oftentimes been kind of the point where we aren't able to really push through that wall. So for me, I think the big sort of step forward has been trying to utilize, AAC more for the variety of functions of, language, for, describing, your environment, for social interaction, all of those ways. In part two, I think that, the kind of low-tech nature of PECs, and, you can only fit so many pages in a binder. You can only laminate and Velcro, so many little, paper squares, but with, with the current technology, there's not those types of limits. So that lets us kind of, broaden the, the picture, so to speak, on, what types of things we're looking at. And so then we kind of get into, a, kind of bigger view, a bigger picture of, verbal behavior and, functions of language, and what kinds of stuff that we can really look for. And that's not a knock on PECs, obviously, because they've got all of the, when you get into the more advanced stages, they have those, the sentence strips and all that kind of stuff. But historically, my experience has been typically that we never really push through that wall with PECs. We kind of get up to that point, and
and there's a reason why, as far when you think about it, language development wise. So a kiddo typically develops language and uses some primary words, and when they get to about 50 words that they're going to express, 50 to 100 words, and they start to combine them once they have those. And you can make 50 to 100 PECs picture cards, but again, do you want to, or if they're at that stage, do you think that they're going, and we're presuming potential, that they have the potential to gain hundreds and hundreds and then thousands and thousands, and learn literacy and all of those wonderful things that come after that. And many of the times we say, yes, we see that development and that's happening. So let's push them to something where we can be modeling more. We can be modeling greetings. We can be modeling commenting. And although PECS does have that built into their phases, that, you know, phase 5 and beyond, you've got the I want strip at phase 4, but at that point, we would want to be thinking, if they're saying I and want and an object, and then later looking at adding an attribute to that object, then we would also say that they're probably at more than 50 to 100 words and could benefit from a dynamic system. So people can, we could again probably debate that one little single argument back and forth, and that's why the feature match is so important too, because some kids do so well with low tech and they have the exchange down that it might be a more gradual process than just saying, okay, they have 50 to 100 expressive words, it's time for a device. But again, like thinking about the potential and where we want them, if we think they have all of those skills that we want an independent communicator to have, or the potential to have all of those skills, then we don't want them to have just a book with voice output. So we've done, I'm probably going to be missing some things. So once we get into some of the high tech programming, we obviously, like, you've done a lot of ABA programming within PECS to help some of that functional communication, but we've also done some programming to help carry over with expressive communication on a speech generating device. So the one that always comes to my head is a lot of paraprofessional ABA staff will work on in their DTT or discrete trial training. Okay, it is. Yep. I'm having a Monday. Okay, nope, so you got it all. So when they're doing that though, they are already working on some things like categorization or functional use of objects.
Sure.
And a lot of our systems that we're looking at dynamically have a similar categorical representation or format to how they're organized. So specifically when you look at Lampwords for Life, since we mentioned that one, that's an app that's based off of semantic compaction, which is a fancy way to say that one picture means multiple things. So you have a picture of a frog jumping, and that will take you to both places and the word go, because you have a limited amount of screen capacity to fit all of these thousands and thousands of words in. So what we work on then is the ability to categorize. Okay, well, if we're talking about places, then let's match those places and work on that in ABA. Or a better example might be food, right? Like how do we label food? Well, that's all under the apple. And so how can we, carry that over? So we've done that one. That's the first one that comes to my head.
For sure. And I think, that's just, to me, kind of an expansion on, a lot of the stuff that we do initially focuses on matching. That's kind of like one of the more, kind of common initial skills that we'll focus on. And obviously, there's different kind of levels to it, and we'll learn where they're at and, progress forward. But we start with, matching identical objects or symbols and pictures, and then graduating to, like you're saying, these kinds of, categorization, and it can be by features, by functions, by category. And ultimately, when we get up to, the more kind of advanced language that we're talking about, kind of expanding on, past sort of the I want, whatever, and we want to talk about, labeling and describing, there's this aspect of kind of, using the device becomes a sort of matching exercise if we're looking at, describing pictures or naming things where, you've got the visual stimulus that we want to describe, and they need to find, that symbol in the device. So, that's something that we kind of work on, and also just, kind of expanding on this idea that, the word, horse goes with, the text for horse goes with the picture of the horse, and all of these different, kind of stimuli are related, and how to, make that connection between the device, the materials, and the spoken words, the language that we're using.
Yeah. And I think it's really important too, to just make sure like that teams do tap into your guys' expertise while they're doing that programming, because I have seen in the past where they jump and they only do like a simple matching activity using the device, and then the device almost becomes aversive because the kid isn't really using it as an expressive tool, but
Mm-hmm.
more as just a receptive, like you said, just like a find the
Yes. Yeah, that's
and
what
you
it's
and so
totally.
it's so you have to do it so gently, right? So we're
Mm-hmm.
constantly kind of like shaping our teams to make sure that they're using it in the right format.
And that's one of those things too, where the prompting, comes into play a lot, and you start getting into very small differences there, because we are always looking at, for any, um, uh, you know, any response, we're looking at, well, what's the antecedent that we want to precede it? What's the response look like on its own? And then what's the consequence that's supposed to come after that? So that 3-term contingency, we want to, when we're teaching it, we want to make sure that we're teaching it in the right way, the way that's going to support, kind of the natural, like you said, generalized, sustained use of that language. So if you're talking about, making that leap to, just using the device to name and describe things, making sure that when we're cueing that response, that we're not saying, okay, now find, um, find the word for phone, we need to be making sure that we're, teaching it the same way we would, not necessarily the exact same way, but, and, understanding that for that student with an AAC device, that's just their response for, a student who isn't using the device to, to name things. And so that we've got to teach it in a way that, doesn't kind of deviate to now where they're finding, language. You don't find the word for phone, you say the word for phone, so making sure that we're doing that kind of the best possible way.
Right. And the best way that I always describe it, Ryan, is just saying, if you can do it without a device, do you need the device? Like,
right.
Can you find the picture of the phone between a field of 3 pictures I have in front of you? Okay, you don't need the device. Can you say phone? And if you can't say phone, then we need to pull out the device. But making sure they differentiate the 2 things, I think, is so important. But you brought up prompting, so I'm gonna take us back a few years, because I remember, and I think I told you this, I remember being so nervous. You were one of my first ABA associates that came to my prompting class, and I remember telling you, like, give me feedback, because I'm so nervous to upset the ABA world. I don't want to say anything wrong. And you came up and you're like, oh no, it made so much sense, like the fact that you were using a hierarchy, and people don't always do that, they jump from least to most. And I remember feeling such relief, but I will never forget that, because I was so anxious about having you there. Now it's fine, but
and I think lots of people in lots of fields, can kind of get the sense that there's only one way that things always need to be done. And, I think, our one of our core values should be, just pragmatism. Does it work? Is this going to be effective? So, the longer you do this, the more you realize there's not just one way to prompt. And, a lot of us were initially trained by somebody who told us there's only one way to do it, and you have to do it this way. And the first time somebody told you a different way, it kind of blew your mind a little bit, So I try to be a little less, kind of rigid in my own, thinking about, the exact specific way that you have to prompt all the time. But keep in mind, what's the most important thing to remember, and that's making sure that we're building independence and fading prompts. To me, this question of, well, how do I prompt it? How do I prompt it? I want to always be thinking about, how do I fade that prompt and get back to independence? Because it's really easy to even inadvertently find yourself in a situation where, a kiddo gets, prompt dependent, and then all of a sudden, you find yourself only getting the response when we're prompting it a particular way. So
it's funny you say that. I feel like that's happened with my son and his manners. Like, I've at least gotten to the point, like with some training on my end, where I just wait him out, but it's still like a hard, natural pause. And I kind of give him an expectant look and I'm like, stop it. Because inevitably he'll say something like, I want, his favorite television show is Monster Trucks, of course. He's a boy through and through. So he's like, I want Monster Trucks. And I'm just like, but kid you not, for the longest time, I was like, what do you say? Like, you haven't said the magic word. And I like think to myself, you teach this. Stop giving the prompts. Stop over prompting.
Well, even just what do you want? What do you want at, in and of itself is something that, I encourage staff to be mindful of how often you're saying that, because if we're thinking about, all of these, all these students where, my gosh, every IEP goal that says so-and-so will, express, utilize communication to express their wants and needs. Expressing yourself doesn't just mean answering a question when somebody asks you. It means expressing the need when you have it a lot of the times. And look, so making sure that, we have that ability to initiate and not just respond to what do you want? What do you want? And understanding that if I need that pencil and I see that pencil and I see you, that I can just, ask for it. I don't need to wait for you to say, oh, it looks like you want something. What do you want? So,
and we talk about that. It's kind of like a twofold problem, right? Because one is if you have the motivation and it's reinforcing and you have a communication partner and then you have the language, if you have those components, you shouldn't need a prompt. Like, period. You shouldn't need it to be able to initiate language and get your needs met. But the other component, so usually one of those things is missing, right? The other component is that in school, we're even asking our typically developing kiddos our students to wait until you are spoken to before you ask for something. So it's not necessarily the most conducive place to get spontaneous language. And then if they do spontaneously speak, we're like, wait your turn, or just a second, or hush.
And for me, that's one of those things for me that it's just about like recognize, when you're talking about, language development and when you expect certain things that, recognizing that if that's the next skill for, for this kiddo to master, we better all be okay with them, asking for something out of the blue, because this idea of recognizing, when you're supposed to ask and when you're not supposed to ask, well, that's not going to happen until we've got the ability to consistently just ask. You can't, we can't expect to, to have that under total consistent control across the board, with all the different contingencies and, things that discriminations that you need to make to know, who's going to give me this and who's not and all this other kind of stuff. So the first thing that is, if we're really starting from that, that early starting point, making sure that we understand, like, look, it might be the first time that kid has ever asked for anything on their own out of the blue. So make a big deal out of it. It's a big deal,
I don't care if it's like the 1,000th time they've asked. Like, we can learn social constructs later. Like, give the kid what he wants.
Totally.
Yeah. So talking, we talked about prompting, but is there a certain thing in regards to AAC that you've learned in your 16 plus years now that you felt like is the most important thing, or something that you were like, I wish I had this from day one?
I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is, when I think about how, like my field has evolved, and I look at the way that your field has evolved as well, I think the big thing that, is always this idea that, AAC, like you said, is not just for, for kiddos that are unable to use, to produce vocal speech, and that we can use all of these tools to, to help,
Augment.
Yeah, I mean, that's in the title. To, expand length of utterance and build vocabulary and reinforce the, the communication partnerships, all of those things, even for, it feels like, we shouldn't have to, kind of keep saying it, but even for, students that are able to, tell you, I want bubbles. But if there's some, breakdown in their communication, that, AAC is something that we can, look at to, to help them make that next leap, and that it's not going, reassuring people that, it's not going to, to suppress, the vocal speech and the vocal language, and, kids that are already, maybe making some requests some of the time, but it's the opposite, and we have the, the research now to show us that, whether it's PECS or, the other systems, that utilizing those is, more likely to, lead to expanded, vocal communication than the opposite. So that to me is the big thing, because, definitely when I first started, there was the sense that, well, if we were considering, a device or, some system for a student, that was kind of this question as well. Do they really need it? Do they really need it? And now it's, the question of, do they really need it, is just based on, is it something that could benefit them? Not do they really need it, but is it something that could benefit them? And, in many cases, the answer is yes, even when there is, some vocal communication that's already established.
Yeah, and we don't have anybody on it right now, but I've even used enhancement of learning new social constructs and in context for some of our kiddos who have a lot of rote communication, where they do have like the I want bubbles, like I want like an item. They have some basic greetings and things, but they're not necessarily based within the context. So some of our older kids that are doing VSP or in high school programs that have some language have been doing really well on a system called Snap Core First, because it breaks it down in different environments. So if you go to a work setting, you're going to use different language than if you're in a classroom. And so giving them some of those different functional communicational phrases in that work setting, and teaching them that this is the language we use here, can be really helpful and supportive. So never, your job's never done, I guess, is where I was going with that. But I think you make a good point in saying that just AAC can be for all. And even, I mean, pulling in peer models, we don't have a lot of peer models down in our district that we work in, but pulling in peer models when appropriate can be really powerful too, and letting them see it. Do you think that that is still a challenge with some teams, or what, if, as far as the buy-in for using AAC with someone who might have some echoic communication or echoic behavior? Do you think, or is a different challenge that you feel like your teams, and what observations you've had right now in the world of AAC?
Right now, I mean, I think, I mention it as, a big, kind of evolution, because in part because right now I don't see it as an obstacle, very much anymore. I feel like it used to be, and that's why, it's kind of a salient example for me, because I feel like previously it was a big, it was always a very big discussion, where maybe somebody thought that they should have it and somebody thought that they shouldn't, and all this other kind of stuff. So lately, right now, I feel like, access, to those kinds of supports is not restricted, for the students that I work with. I feel like, my gosh, now I'm like going through in my head trying to figure out on my caseload who doesn't have access to some form, even if it's just core words or, whatever.
Well, I mean, if not that, then is there an area you wish your students or your teams would grow further? In our world, there's different hot topics and things right now, but I'm just curious from an ABA perspective.
Yeah,
do you
I mean,
feel like
I think
things are rolling?
Sure. I think, something that we could definitely, do better in is, finding more settings and situations, expand, really generalizing outside of the classroom. And even, that's something that, I think we're all, maybe not all of us, but I know I'm guilty of sometimes. I was talking about that kind of, that hardcore requesting session, having this time to focus with it, but, making sure, when we set aside that time for, for this activity, it's easy for, for staff to think, oh, well, that's the time that we work on this activity instead of, something that should be, going across all scenarios. So, just even thinking about like, and this is, just one of these issues that we're like, okay, how, even if we want to, it still takes some work to figuring out what's the best way to do it. But something like the playground, bring communication, out there with, for students that, have a device. Are we expecting them to carry an iPad with them down the slide, on the swing, or, so.
Well, funny you say that, Ryan. We're actually rolling out some communication low-tech playground boards this year as an initiative.
I've seen that. I've seen the pictures because you got the grant for that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We were just waiting for students to return before we rolled them out, but it's just funny that you possibly mentioned that. So even if they don't have their high-tech system, then the plan is to have access to that. And I'll pull my son in a couple of videos and we'll do some demonstrations and hopefully get those up sooner rather than later.
But no, I think that's one of the, kind of the areas where it's just like, okay, now, making sure that it, that's something that's available consistently, universally, for students so that we're not just, bringing it out during, okay, it's language time. Okay. It's, snack time, we work on requesting. So make sure we've got, having it, always be there.
Or that misnomer that it's only done in DTT. Like that's
totally.
a big one,
Totally.
Not expanding behind DTT and pencil and paper tasks.
Yep, totally. And, and also just the idea of, and this is, an ongoing process, but making sure that students are taking ownership of the devices themselves and not having it be, something that's exclusively managed by, the adult staff. It's, if we want independence, if we want the student to use it on their own and making sure that they're, that we're at least working on having them access the device, get it when they need it, and carry it with them different places, things like that.
Well, and that's been a big aha for a lot of my teams in the sense that if the child truly had ownership, right, they would have brought it to all their Zoom sessions. And my golly, where are all these devices for our Zoom sessions? They have to, oh yeah, pull it back out. We got to grab it. Grab the device. It's time to talk. Time to talk. So I mean, I would agree with you. I think expanding to home, getting families comfortable, the more we can show them, the more they're going to understand and have that buy-in and see that success. And the more independent a student is, the more likely they are to carry that over beyond the classroom.
Yeah.
Okay, so last question before we wrap up. We share a fair few students, so I'm curious if any of these will be your favorite moment, but describe to everyone your favorite moment that's included AAC. It could be something that's just something that you've had an opportunity to see, or something, with a student specifically where something really exciting happened.
I mean, there's so many, honestly. It's like, for some of mine, I think it happens at kind of both ends of the scale. I think the things that excite me most, honestly, a lot of times are those really early text exchanges. I have a student that we were working on, just text phase 1, grab, grasp, reach, release. And we were requiring a lot of prompting for that. And, there was lots of discussions about, even just having the Velcro on the picture wasn't enough for, it was difficult to prompt that. And then it was, of course, right before spring break, right before we closed down. But I remember watching a session with him with his speech pathologist, and honestly, I'm pretty sure it was Bubbles that he was, wanting, but it was some toy. I'm like 90% sure it was, like a bubble, one of those things that you turn on and it shoots them all around the room. And it was just over and over again, and we had set meetings and team meetings and all this kind of stuff and talk about all these modifications. And he was just a real hard nut to crack. And then there he was, just over and over again, making, one great exchange after another for, to get that activity to continue. So, for me, a lot of times it is that, those first, kind of light bulb moments where you see them really get it, really understand, okay, we're in this together, I can have this interaction and, and either meet a need or, benefit from kind of the, even just the social connection with that. So those to me are always, I would say, my favorite. But the other stuff that I like too, when we kind of think about the technology is, I always get a kick out of the kids that, that are really already motivated for the social interaction. And maybe we've got some speech production issues and we put, can I tell you a joke? When we, with the jokes and the stuff that gets, kind of programmed into the social interaction, and, you get the kiddos that, are just like, they see you come in, it's like, oh, here's somebody else to, to tell my joke to. So those get me every time. So I love that stuff too.
That's funny. Well, I was gonna bring up a story if you didn't, but one of our friends in middle school, he was really grabbing onto his device, and the staff, and we talk a lot about how kids, when they don't have what they want to say, they might say something close to what they want to say. Do you know where I'm going with this? And so the staff was working on some requests, and they were doing kind of maybe like even a mini break, I'm not sure, but they asked the student, now he'd already been eating some popcorn, and the staff member was like, do you want some more popcorn? And he went to his device and he goes, no. And then he found the word shut. So SHUT. And the staff was like, I don't think he meant shut. And I was like, I don't think he meant shut either. Like, duh, give me my popcorn. I think he didn't have the word that he wanted. And had he had that word, he would have used that word. But it's still one of my favorite moments. And because it's like, like, give the kids the words and they will use them appropriately. If you build it, they will come. But yeah, that was one of our fun students.
No, and I those are all those. I get a kick out of that too. Just when, gosh, there's only so many junk foods and candies and snacks or whatever that you can, program into these, and seeing, on the device, some of the ways that, kids have asked for whatever the specific thing they want without having that specific picture in there. That's always exciting, whether it's something else that's,
like
close,
a bear candy for a gummy bear or something. 100%. Yep.
Yeah.
Or if they don't have the right color Skittle, they'll ask for like a blue candy if you give them like an M&M. Oh yeah, 100%. It's so creative. Like when it's motivating, when they have the language, and when they know they can get what they want, they're able to do that.
Yeah.
So, well, Brian, you've been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure everyone found all of your insight just wonderful. If someone has a question and they want to follow up with you on something specific, what is the best way to reach you?
Oh yeah, to reach me, I would just say through email, my SSD email. It's rpkennedy@ssdmo.org.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.
Hi guys, it's Cheryl Livingston with AAC Innovations, and today I want to talk about prompts and cues. So working in special ed, we know that we want to help our students and we want them to feel successful. But in the process of helping, sometimes we get a little too carried away. And what I mean by that is we help and we make it right, and we speed it along by giving them the answer, or by even in hand over hand, helping them get something accomplished. Well, I want to advise us to A, be very mindful of what we're doing, and B, to do the least amount of prompts possible. So when we're talking about a student with an AAC system, I want to make sure we are helping them to feel successful, but because they did it themselves, not because we made it happen. We know, we've all seen students that became very prompt dependent. They waited for us, or they will wait for us to tell them it's okay, or to tell them the next step. It's just human nature to, I guess, want people to help you, but we're not making them independent communicators if they need our help in order to communicate. I want our students to be able to say whatever they want to say to whoever they want to say it, at any time, and it shouldn't be dependent on who their communication partner is. And that, by that I mean, you know, they kind of know, well, she's going to help me or he's going to give me the information, so I need him to help me communicate. And I don't want that. I want our students to feel uh, empowered and successful, and they can start any conversation about anything they want to. Now, if they do start a conversation and we can continue on, that's wonderful. If there's a problem that they need to bring up, then we need to address the problem. But if it's a time that's not a good time to communicate or have a conversation, I want us to say, okay, well, we'll talk about that later. Here, let's write that down so we'll remember to talk about that later. I've seen too many times where something's going on, there's an activity, there's a group lesson, and a kid will bring something up, and we will pretty much automatically say, no, now's not the time for that. We're not doing that. We're talking about this. And I worry that, again, we're helping them or we're causing them to feel that their communication isn't important, that, you know, again, they got shot down. So that's not good. I want us to make them feel like communication is a good thing. So what I want to talk about today is prompts and cues. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to go to our AAC site. It's a Google site. So this is what it looks like when you first go there. And again, this is stuff that's living there for you guys to take advantage of. And there's stuff there now, but there will be more stuff to come. So you got to keep going back. I'm going to go to implementation, teaching and implementing AAC, and then scroll down, and then you scroll through this box. There's a category called prompting and cueing. And here is all kinds of resources, all kinds of handouts. All these handouts are fantastic. Some of them just talk to you better than others, as far as you like the graphics, you like the way they describe it. It just has more meaning if you're sharing it with a teammate or, you know, staff person, somebody who's supporting the student also with their communication. You know, I would love for these to be posters on the wall. So however you want to handle it. It's definitely a wide variety, and these are just some things that we've gathered. So I want to start first with the problems of prompting. This comes from our AAC coach, who has been phenomenal this year about helping us provide information in a way that's easy to read, understandable, and just quick, you know, tips that I have definitely have appreciated her work this year. So she says, the problem with prompting. We have so many things we want to teach. We might think that prompting will help our AAC learners. We have good intentions, but we need to be careful. So here's why. First of all, like I was just saying, it's their voice. We can't read their minds. We can't guess what they're going to say. We definitely want them to, you know, be speaking for themselves. So when we prompt language that does not match their thought, anything that they're wanting to say, then we're teaching them that the device or the book or whatever system isn't really them. It's us talking through that. I don't want our students to be little parrots that just parrot back what we tell them to say. I want them to be speaking for themselves. And the way they'll realize that they have that power is when something they do communicate is meaningful. Something happens. They made something, you know, work that they couldn't do otherwise. They made a choice that you wouldn't have known otherwise. So it's very important. Number two, when we use lots of prompts for communication, we teach our learners to be responders, not initiators. And that seems to be kind of how school has been set up for centuries now, is we teach, we share all kinds of information, but the way we know for sure that they got it, that it made sense, that they understood, is by how they respond. So that's the reason we take tests, is you got to show them what you know. Well, again, when we're talking communication, we all want to make sure we're working on what they're thinking, not just giving us back the answer. So if we only communicate with them, if we only come to them with, here's something I want you to tell me, a response, then we've only done half of what communication is. And I feel like the more motivating part of communication is when you can tell them, I mean, the student can tell you, I should say, when they can initiate, when they can cause you to get off topic by talking about something they want to talk about. So we want to make sure we cover all that. And number three is, how do our learners perceive our prompts and cues? Are they helpful? Are we annoying? Do we increase their stress or add to their being overwhelmed? And I do see that. I do think, and we've talked about it in our previous session, the word therapized, and I think it's a real word. Our kids have been in therapy since they were itty bitties, and they're learning, they're showing progress, but they still maybe see it as, oh, here she comes again. Oh, he's going to make me do that. It's a demand, it's a nag, it's a, us being kind of like, you can't get that till you do this, isn't necessarily motivating for them. I don't know. Sometimes we have to think about how we're coming at them. So by us prompting and talking and, okay, here it is, tell me this, did you hear me the question? I'm going to tell you it again. Every time we do that, we've just caused them either to be more annoyed, or some of our kids, they're processing, they're figuring things out, and then we say it again and they've got to do a reset. They got to think about it again. So sometimes less is better. Less is more, sometimes we say. Okay, so this handout is living in our site. Here's another one of hers while we're talking about her. Here's kind of how she charts it out. Oh, I'm having a trouble getting my graphic here. But the first thing is you wait. Patience, please. Do what you're doing, but then pause, wait. And then we can go to an indirect or less direct verbal, such as maybe you have something to say. I'll let them know you're there, you're listening. And then a gesture or a direct verbal, point to the device or talk, or to their, say your talker might help me understand some, here's a way you can tell me more. And then model. So we talk about modeling and we want you to model all the time, but when you're actually kind of going back and forth with a student, first, give them a chance before you start showing them. So let's see if I can show you the video that Laura made a while back.
Hey Allison, how's it going?
And see if this is kind of her going through the process with Allison. So this is staged.
Talk to me. Uh-oh. Stop. We'll stop in a second. We're having a conversation. Let's go back to your home, and then we can go under the social, and we can use a pink word. What do we say? Do we say hello, or do we say goodbye? When we say hello, say hello. Hello. Hey!
So as you were watching that, Laura, the scenario was Laura greeted her and Allison wasn't too sure what to do. And she worked her through just a little bit of help to a little bit more, to a little bit. And she actually was giving her at the end a maximum prompt as far as here's the one you're looking for. But she waited to get there. She didn't automatically jump. Again, resources, there's an article here by Jane Corsten and Terry Foss about prompting a cautionary tale. So again, she's talking us through why we need to be concerned. And I wanted to highlight this section right here. Let's see if I can blow it up a little bit. Prompt strategies with respect to communication and AT, assistive technology, need to consider the independence aspect of the goal. If the goal is to communicate and or control one's environment independently, then one must understand, the student must understand, if you want something, you must ask for it or activate your switch, your device, whatever your system is. If you do not ask, if one does not ask or activate, you may not get what you want. And if one does not want something, one should not ask or activate a switch. So that's that whole understanding of what happens here. And we take it for granted. Developmentally, our kids just, typically developing babies, just learn all that back and forth kinds of things through practice, through us modeling, through us reinforcing. But our kiddos that are learning a system may still need to break that down as far as, well, what do I need to do and what shouldn't I do? So this is a good article for you to have and to share. And then another, again, just the graphics. There's different ways of thinking of it. Kate Ahern has the graphic here of prompt hierarchy that we share often. And her main umbrella that she's wanting to present here, as I'm loading up my graphic, is that we should always use aided language stimulation, also known as modeling, aided language inputs, etc. But one of her first things, like I said, that's our big picture. Now, how do we get there? So her first thing is create motivation. We need to have a reason to communicate. We got to have something we want to talk about. And then inviting or expectant pauses, then indirect, then direct, then indirect verbals, and then direct verbals, and then non-directive verbal modeling, and then increase motivation again, make it a reason to communicate, and then re-expose the target vocabulary. So then she's breaking it down into, well, you could say this. So I like that one. And then another one that's really cool is this one from PRC with quick little graphics of, kind of what you're doing. So they're showing us that there's spelling, they kind of write it out here too, but just the graphic, there's the least amount of prompts all the way down to the most amount of prompts. So again, just stop, pause. And then this nonverbal prompt, maybe you just gesture, huh? What do you want to say? Well, got something? And then environmental cues, ask open-ended questions. Then you can do a visual prompt, give 2 choices, model. Maybe they need a little assistance just to kind of move forward towards their system, and then a physical prompt. And then even here, hand under hand to help them get to something versus hand over hand. I so much believe that our students, when we start grabbing and making things happen, hand over hand, they become little marionettes. They're just like on strings, like, okay, do whatever. I feel like they're not as involved. They're letting you take over, and then it doesn't have as much meaning as it could. So I worry, again, my key word here is that we sometimes resort to that to make it happen. And the thought is that if they see it happen, then that triggers. So you can't, argue. I would rather argue that they let you do it and they don't take responsibility. So I'm definitely going to save that as a very, very, very last resort. So all kinds of cool stuff. We just wanted to make sure that you had a place to go. Again, we'll add more as we find more. So this isn't a done deal. Keep coming back and looking for more. Ask us questions about what you can maybe change about the way you do things. I was watching a session the other day, and it was just obvious from me just observing. I was a fly on the wall, watching through Zoom, that the student, as soon as the therapist, the speech pathologist, came with the deck of cards, she turned her back. She was like, no, not doing it. And then I was just like, well, let's just play. Let's just, and then she was very much engaged and definitely got a lot more out of the device because she had a reason to talk. She had a fun thing that she was doing. So I think if we can sometimes lighten up on our demands, then the reason to communicate is greater, and the amount of prompting that our students need will be a lot less because they want it to happen. Thank you for your time. I'll talk to you later. Bye.